Welcome, everyone, to Mythstorie, a podcast about myths and history. I am one of your hosts, Bryant, with my permanent guest, Cammy. Brady Bunch. Here's a Cammy. She's a permanent guest. No, I can't sing any more of that. We're going to get
Hey, Bryant.
And then next to me is Peter. So, Peter, hello. Welcome back. This is Podicus Magnus.
Yar.
Goodness.
Nice to have me back.
Peter, welcome back. It's so nice to have you.
It's always a pleasure.
Guys, this is it's been, it's busy. I'll break the fourth wall. It's November. It's gonna be really busy real soon. So if you're just joining us, welcome. You came at a great time. Mythstorie is a show where we like to take myths, stories, legend, history, tales, all that great stuff. Then Cammy and I will give you that story, and then we'll kind of talk about some of the facts and history behind it. And then once in a blue moon, our good friend Peter will come join us, and then we'll do the same thing, but it's just longer, and we're probably drinking. So
yeah. When the tides are favorable, I come for a visit.
Exactly. Yeah. He just washes up on shore with a tablet. So when I say we're going to be busy, we have some big events coming up. You're going to be hearing this on Friday soon for me, but it's Friday now. And next Thursday, December 3rd at 8:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, that's South Carolina time, where we're all from, we're going to be on Indie Pods United. Nice big convention that's going on. Really looking forward to it. Cammy and I will be there talking about stuff that's myth and history related all at the same time. And then right after that, that's Sunday, December 6th at 9 a.m. EST, same time, our time. Peter and I will be there for some holiday fun VCOM shenanigans. That's what we did back in August, where we showed off a pre-recorded episode, which did really well, and we just weren't prepared to do a live show, but it's all live. It's going to be really fun.
Yep.
We're super excited. So if you're an old listener, check them out. You can check them out live, but hopefully we should be able to put them on all the channels as normal, all the avenues, podcasting, YouTubing, and all that. But you can join in there live as well, and we'll have more information on our Facebook group page. Okay, so that's all in the future. This is the present, and we're going to talk about the past. And Cammy and I were pretty happy recently. We returned to the OG Greek stuff, Greco-Roman, simple mythstory stuff, and we're going to continue that trend. We're banging them out a lot this month and next week. And this is a really interesting subject too. We're talking about the ancient city of Atlantis. And so Cammy and Peter are going to regale everyone with a story about Atlantis, and then we're just going to dive and dodge right into a discussion about it. So Cammy, I believe you are up. Please tell us everything there is to know about Atlantis right now.
Okay, except for the stuff Peter's talking about.
Yeah, everything except for that.
97%.
Right up until that, I think. So yeah, I used ascendingpassage.com, Plato's Atlantis. Many years before Plato's birth, 9,000 at least, we know of a mighty island nation born from Poseidon's loins. He made the island a paradise with 2 springs running from the center, one of crisp cold water, one of comforting warmth. Every variety of crop grew there, some preferring the warmth, others preferring the cold that sprang forth from the earth. His 5 sons ruled the island's communities, and the largest of them he gave to Atlantis, his favorite child. And the largest of them he gave to Atlas, his favorite child. He gave the place the language and culture of the Greeks. The island boasted more than just 2 springs. They had every metal known to man, and the trees were plentiful, so that they may make houses and buildings to host and entertain all of the civilization which Atlas ruled. Atlas's offspring fashioned a brilliant harbor so that they may rule the sea and the lands beyond them, and they constructed a temple to their patriarch Poseidon. But the more they expanded, the more they found themselves in need of protection, and guard houses were erected at close intervals lining the city walls. And as they grew and had the need of many leaders to rule over the populace, the rulers began to worship power and influence. Anyone who disagreed with them would find themselves jailed or executed with no trial. Still, they expanded. They used their knowledge of metalworking to fashion great weapons of war and took anyone left from the carnage back to their island to keep as slaves. But the sickness of Atlanteans would not go unpunished, for the virtuous Athenians would wage a defense against their attackers. The war lasted for many days, but virtue always prevails. Though outnumbered and outarmed, virtue brings the gods to one side like no other. Athena, along with her all-powerful father, saw an opportunity to rid the wickedness of rulers from the earth, and the tides of war changed. Their mighty spears would fall short of the targets, and the blows of their close combat weapons would never strike true. Blades cracked before the blow could land, and Zeus himself, weary of the struggle, called a council of the gods. He made a plan to drown the city with waves as high as houses, and fire from his lightning bolts, and hot lava from the nearby mountains, until the city was nothing more than a faint suggestion in the imagination of men who would never see it.
That's just rude.
That was awesome.
God. So the Athenians, go figure, who do you think wrote that story? Oh, but the Athenians, we were just sitting there with our wooden sticks. We weren't even advanced. The Atlanteans came over and were so mean.
And just to kind of date this story was told to, Solon, by the Egyptians, according to the dialogue. So according to the Egyptians, like, the Athenians couldn't even remember this history. It was that far back.
Oh yeah.
But the Egyptians, believing themselves to be this superior ancient race, had all these records, and that's where the story supposedly comes from.
And then classical Athens was like, "Oh yeah, that happened. Yeah.
Oh yeah, totally.
Right. We definitely did that. We were there. We're here now. Take that, Sparta."
And we were the good guys.
Yeah. We did nothing wrong. All right, Cammy, that was excellent. A great primer into everything. Peter, please continue the regaling.
I will. And I want to preface this. So where Cammy left off, that's kind of like where the Platonic dialogue or Socratic dialogue ends. Like, this is a fragment that has survived. So we don't know exactly what happened to Atlantis. So I'm taking some liberties in my story. But I think that's also why this Atlantis story persists, is because it's really amazing and fanciful, but not super detailed. So it allows the teller to really kind of, over the centuries, add their own embellishments, just as I'm about to do right now. So here we go. So my source, I use the original dialogue of Plato, Timaeus and Critias. So my descriptions of Atlantis are based on the descriptions in those dialogues, but the ultimate fate of the continent is completely my own invention. So here we go. It seemed as if the gods had cursed our fair island. Ever since our navy limped back into port, a cloud of misfortune had hung over our lands like a funeral shroud. Those proud Athenians drove us back across the great eastern sea. The gods' favor, once celebrated in the temples of Atlantis, had slipped from our shoulders and had been taken up by the strong shield-bearers of Athens. We had witnessed a night blazing bright as day, then followed by a dawn as cold and dark as midnight. During the night, the clouds crackled with thunderbolts, and balls of fire rained down upon our hills and rooftops. The air was choked with smoke. The dark plumes that billowed from the burning forests mingled with the smoke of burning sacrifices. The bulls that once roamed freely about the temple of Poseidon had all been slaughtered and burned upon the altar to honor our founding god. A desperate crowd gathered around the temple, pleading and wailing. The temple, typically radiant with its roof of silver and pillars of ivory, stood dull and silent in this darkened dawn. When great Lord Poseidon fashioned the island of Atlantis many generations ago, he built for us a paradise of security and luxury. Upon the great central plain of our island stood a promontory mountain where he caused 2 great springs to well up, one of hot water, one of cold. Upon this mountain we built our temples and radiant city of Orichalcum. Around the plain, Lord Poseidon dug 3 circular rings and caused the sea to well up within them. Thus our people would be forever protected from invaders and given easy passage around the island on elaborate barges. Each ring was separated by a high wall that was covered in different colors of metal, one of brass, one of tin, and one of the precious metal orichalcum. The cities built in each ring were constructed of the same materials as their protective wall, with the opulent city of the inner ring built of the radiant red metal orichalcum. Later generations built a series of bridges and canals that radiated from the central city like the spokes of a wheel. A great central harbor welled up within the central ring, and this became a center of commerce, art, and culture. Elephants roamed wild, and cunning hunters tamed the beasts and trained them to tow our barges and carry goods to the outer rings. But now all was falling to ruin. After a night of raining fire, the dawn finally broke on the eastern horizon. As the sun rose up above the great eastern sea, framed by the pillars of Heracles, the bombardment of fire seemed to slow and finally stopped. Neighbors turned to one another, sighing with relief and praising the merciful gods. But suddenly, the dim light of dawn flared to an almost blinding light, a great ball of fire, many times larger than the projectiles that fell onto our towns and fields, streaked across the sky directly over our precious island. It blazed across the eastern sky, leaving a trail of black smoke behind it. It seemed to be aimed at the rising disk of Helios itself. It disappeared over the horizon, but no sooner was it gone from sight than there was a blinding eruption of light. The ground shook, and onlookers were knocked off their feet from the shockwave that followed. The rising sun disappeared as if a great wall had suddenly been built up in front of it. The people of Atlantis crowded about the docks of the harbor, hoping to flee the island by boat. But our great fleet, all 12,000 ships, lay mired in mud. It was as if the ocean had been sucked away by a freakish tide. From the outer rings, you could see miles of exposed ocean bed and schools of stranded fish gasping for breath. Looking to the east, the horizon swelled and appeared to be racing towards our island home. Many Atlanteans realized too late that a mountainous wave was about to crest over our heads. From my spot upon the highest hill on the great plain, I saw the stout walls of the outer ring wash away as if they were made of sand. Whole neighborhoods vanished in an instant. In a panic, I threw myself into a nearby barrel and held the lid on with all my strength. I felt myself flung into the air, only to crash down again onto the sea. I was tossed and turned for what seemed like an eternity until the wave's anger finally subsided. It has been several days, and a small flotilla of survivors has formed, just a handful of battered ships and ramshackle rafts. We do not know how far out into the Western Sea we have drifted, or if there's even an Atlantis to return to. We have resolved to take our chances with the sea beasts that are said to patrol the western edge of the great ocean, rather than attempt to return to the site of our cursed home. Perhaps we will find new lands to the west, where our proud race might rebuild our great temples and win back the favor of the gods. Surely the glory and achievements of Atlantis will never be forever erased from the histories of men.
And that's exactly, it is not erased. It's so dang prevalent. What a great story. Well done, Peter. That was really great.
Good job.
So, Atlantis. This is a really fun subject, and I guess to start yes, Plato wrote his dialogues around 360 BCE. Plato was a philosopher, a Greek philosopher in ancient Athens. He himself classical Athenian, and so there's this funny like bias that's there that we'll talk about a little bit more. But I want to point out, with Mythstorie, Cammy and I started the show. We love myths and history, and we both have a little bit of we took a couple college classes. We've got a little bit of an educational background in that, but we're not experts. We're not like hardcore history people, but we really love talking about this stuff. And I didn't really know. I mean, I know of Plato, Socrates, and all that, just about as much as the next person, really. I'm aware of them. And so but I knew about these dialogues and the philosophical story, the literary prose that they were saying. And there was this great thing from one of my sources that talked about how Plato, he wrote in this style where people are having a conversation, almost like a play or something like that, because he was apparently worried that people would rely too much on writing and would not discuss things. And that makes me laugh, because I've definitely heard in the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years, people talk about the reliance on internet and stuff like that. Like, oh, we're just, you won't need to learn anything if you can just find it out. And I get that's a half empty kind of way of looking at it. I try to be more positive and more half full. And that's why we're doing this show. That's literally like why we're doing this show. Not because we're afraid you're not going to memorize Plato's dialogues, but because we just want to talk about stuff to figure it out. And we've learned a lot. And this is what Atlantis was for me in a good way in my looking into it. And of course our discussion now. So that's where we've set the time period. Okay. And we've talked about it in a lot of other shows, especially like Troy and stuff like that. Now think about this. So 360 BCE. So this is, quite a long time ago. This is ancient. This is the classical period of Athens. And Atlantis to Plato, it's like Troy. It was a myth. Hercules, all these things were so old and rooted in their cultures. They've been around for so long, and so it's just ingrained in their history. And so we don't know. There's a lot of like conspiracy theories in that way. But the crazy thing about Atlantis is just how prevalent it is because of the way it was used. It was sort of used as a literary device by Plato. And then there was this sort of like, well, why did you mention it? Kind of thing. And like Troy, we don't know if King Priam was there for the downfall of Troy in the same way that Homer tells us in the Odyssey. But there is like archaeological evidence in the location of where Troy is today. And it's apparent people have lived there. But with Atlantis, there's no evidence of an island or a city being where it was supposed to be. And there's a few kind of guesses as to what this was. And the biggest reason is the Santorini eruption, the Minoan eruption. And that was a huge eruption that happened between 1642 and 1540 BC. So that was over 1,000 years before Plato was around. Mm-hmm. So and there's archaeological evidence of that, but it was in that area, and it was pretty devastating. And there's evidence of it, and there's some writing on it too. And so,
I just want to, if I can interrupt real quick, I just want to, if you have a chance, listener, look at a satellite image of Santorini, and it's basically like all the beautiful photos of Greece that show like the white walls and the blue seas. Most of those are taken in Santorini. But if you look at a satellite view of that island, it's like a big crescent around a gigantic crater where this event occurred, and it wiped out a major Minoan civilization. So
right. And there's some really cool things though. So our first episode was about the Minotaur of Crete, and it's a fantastic episode. Can't recommend enough. And we talked about that too. The Minoan civilization. Again, there's been colonies in that area for timeless. It's forever. And one thing that's really cool about their religion and culture is their reverence for bulls in general, and that's kind of where the Minotaur comes from. And there's tons of pottery and other art that feature bulls and stuff like that. And reading about Atlantis, that was a big feature of Atlantis as well. And some of my sources like Ancient EU, Theoi, and Wikipedia, they mention how King Minos was very lawful. He was a very, I mean, wasn't very benevolent. He's sometimes an antagonist. We talk about this in an episode. I think it's coming up soon. Daedalus and Icarus. We'll talk about that soon if we haven't already. And so there's an idea that maybe Plato was kind of like Atlantis is sort of, it either is kind of a representation of Crete and the Minoans, or it's sort of like an antithesis to them, but it's very much so based off of them. But it's really cool. I mean, the idea, so several writers wrote, of course, Plato was sort of the first in the 4th century BCE, but Diodorus Siculus in the Library of History wrote in 1st century BC, and then Plutarch and Aelian, I've talked about him before, and I always mess that name up. Those are in the 1st through the 3rd centuries, and even Pliny the Elder, that old guy, he wrote about it in the 1st century in the Latin Encyclopedia. So it comes up, and in those writings, even it's kind of used as like a literary device or an allegory of some kind. Mostly, it's sort of like, it's weird because Troy, again, like Troy had people. You can see the people, even like the evidence of the Santorini eruption. There were still settlements there, and people had this memory of the eruption, and there was clearly evidence of it. And so it's easy to understand why they would believe in the eruption, why they would believe in the Minoans and Troy, because it's there. It's still there for them today in their present. But Atlantis wasn't. And so that's the crazy thing. It's this ancient bit. And also distinctively, it was distinctively futuristic, you know? I think it is a circle jerk of Athens. That's what I think it is, really. Okay, because
we took them down.
I never even knew that was the thing. I knew Atlantis sunk. That's about it, you know. And then of course, like in modern, like my kids' cartoons depictions in the 90s, it was like, I mean, they had like, they were like in the future in you know, they always had advanced technology, and like, well, advanced technology in classical Athens is like a sharp spear, you know, like a really sharp spear. That's like whoa, it's like an iPhone 12. And so, but they were advanced per like classical. Now, I mean, if you're advanced in 1500 BCE, if you have stuff from the 3rd century BC, that's freaking amazing, you know. That is really like advanced. So,
well, they're almost referred to as like a magical race, like they actually were like gifted. And I think that I kind of refer to this in my story, like, you know, a lot of people have theorized like, oh, maybe the survivors of Atlantis founded some of these other civilizations in like South America, and et cetera, et cetera. Like, you know, not allowing those cultures the agency to do that on their own.
Yeah, there's a lot there. I'm getting to that soon too.
Oh, cool.
There wasn't a resurgence of it. One funny thing, I actually wrote a note, and that just reminded me. I think so. Other than it being an Athenian like praise party, poor Poseidon, he just makes a city. It's going really well, really well. Like everyone around Olympus, they're doing their thing. It's 1500. They're still eating their like fingernails. And then, but these Atlanteans, and with the ocean, and it's going great. And all of a sudden it goes sour, and Zeus has to destroy it. Like, Poseidon, I'm sorry, bro. Like they're
kind of dicks. Sorry.
Gotta literally commit genocide. I gotta, bro. I can't help it. I just think that's a little suspective. So anyway, Athenian praise, and Zeus can't handle his bro actually succeeding. I think that's what's really going on here. But anyway, yeah, it's really cool how timeless writing and literary kind of devices are regarding Atlantis. Ancient writers kept bringing it up, but then of course modern. I mean, think about how much we talk about it today. And I don't know about you guys, but I have always had this sort of connection between Atlantis and the concept of utopia and even dystopia. It's always kind of been in my head that Atlantis was sort of obviously like the perfect city, but then it definitely wasn't after it was completely destroyed. And that was certainly sort of what happened in the future starting with Hobbes and the idea of utopia. Atlantis was sort of kind of brought up about that. What's really cool too is I found, I love talking about these new words. I've talked about euhemerism, sort of like making myth, like making myth out of true history.
Mhm.
And that certainly could be the case. Could have been a great civilization where Santorini, what wasn't submerged, Santorini happens, and then people talk about it, over time it just becomes like it was Atlantis. Verisimilitude is another great word, and it's the likeness or believability of a work of fiction. So like if you're watching a movie and it just doesn't make sense, like it's the Civil War movie and this dude pops out a Palm Pilot and he's writing in his calendar, that's not believable. They didn't have Palm Pilots then. Abraham Lincoln couldn't do that. So that's a judgment.
Do we have Palm Pilots now?
That's a really great reference.
So,
it would be just as odd if someone pulled out a Palm Pilot.
They had Blackberries back then.
Right. Yeah. That's verisimilitude. So drop that word at your next water cooler meeting with a mask on. So and that was so there, like Plato and other writers, but Plato especially, he had to get with the story of Salome and the Egyptians and the stories, he was giving it verisimilitude. He was giving but it's interesting because that sort of means believability of a work of fiction. So it's like, was it fiction? Like, was he like, it's not really real, but I'm like, that's what it would be if it was real. So that's not implicitly said. There wasn't a Greek word for, so it's really crazy. But in the New Age, when the New World is discovered by Spain, super Catholic, inspired by the Greeks, etc. There's this resurgence in the entire. Now it's the Atlantic Ocean. Go figure. Atlantic, Atlantis, Atlas, all that stuff. The Atlas Mountains in North Africa. That was the ocean nearby. That's etymology 101 on it. And Atlantis itself is literally means daughter of Atlas, and so it sort of it all makes sense there.
Can I cut in real quick?
Of course, please.
I'm sorry. So according to Plato, the original location of Atlantis was through the Strait of Gibraltar, what we call today, but they called it the Pillars of Heracles, basically the entrance to the Mediterranean Sea.
Yes.
Which, where all these great cultures grew up.
Yeah.
So it was almost and they describe it as commanding that spot, limiting travel out of the Mediterranean,
right.
even after it's sinking.
It was the edge of the world.
Yeah.
It was the edge of the ancient world. I always love it. I'll see if I can find a link to it. I've looked at an ancient map of that was created, I think, by a Persian cartographer, and it's the ancient world, and it's so crazy accurate because you could always see the boot of Italy. That's how you always know where you are, and it's basically I'm making gestures. Go to youtube.com and Mythstorie to see my wonderful figure. But it's essentially like a globe as you would see it spread out, but it's just the Mediterranean. It's like if that was the world where the Mediterranean is all the way to the west, and then Persia and that part of Asia is all the way to the east. That's the world. So yes, it would be on the far west, and it would be where the world sort of cuts. And I mean, if you kept going, you'd find the Americas if you happen to take your galley out that far without getting destroyed. So yes, that's exactly it. There's this crazy idea. Then there was a resurgence in these ideas. And I think, Francisco Lopez de Gomorra was one of the, he was I think a man of the church who, a famous man of the church, historian, maybe not man of the church. I guess they all were back then, but he was a historian who worked in Seville, a Spanish historian from the early 16th century, who kind of wrote on that as well. And that was this idea that's where the Atlanteans went. That's where they went. That's where it is. That's where they were. Especially because you go to Mesoamerica, and there are advanced old societies there. I mean, the architecture is insane. The pyramids, Chichen Itza, it's incredibly old and well detailed. So of course you're going to think that, and it's just kind of wild. And then in 1882, this is sort of my last bit, essentially. coming into the modern age. Ignatius Donnelly of 1882 made the publication Atlantis, the Antediluvian World. That's this book. And he this is from Wikipedia, it basically stimulated the modern interest in Atlantis as we know it. And it was very inspired by the early works on Mayanism specifically. And so he sort of drew these parallels between the old world and new world. So like the ancient Greeks, and then which was the old world to them, and then the literal new world, which was still pretty new in 1882, especially to some British dude. And so he kind of believed that, and he thinks it being where the Garden of Eden's from, the Great Flood destroying Atlantis that's his biblical explanation. So bringing in the Christianity into it. Obviously, Plato wouldn't have been Christian. Although Hellenistic Jews actually did talk about Atlantis too. I have a little bit on that. The Hellenistic Jewish philosopher Philo wrote about the destruction of Atlantis in his On the Eternity of the World in a longer passage. So and even early Christians sort of wrote about it as well. But it's kind of hard to tell if they sort of they believed it or they were tough. They had trouble believing in it due to the pagan origins and things like that, especially in this time. You kind of dropped the old world.
One thing on that, I did not even consider the parallels between the two of these, but the Garden of Eden and Atlantis.
Yeah.
Until what you were just saying, like how it was kind of this virtuous place at first, and then all of a sudden the rulers are like, consumed with avarice.
Yeah, that's extremely great. Yeah, that's a really good point. So yeah, Ignatius Donnelly, he's really credited with being sort of the person who brought it into a modern idea. I mean, say what you will about like him connecting it to Mayanism, but it kind of gave us, it revived the discussion, and it was more. I mean, there was during the Age of Discovery, it kind of went a little crazy. I mean, it's such a the Mesoamerican history is really deep and wild, and the church's involvement in that, and their assertion on what can be said about the peoples and the places of the New World was wild. And I took a great colonial Latin American class, and we didn't talk about Atlantis. I mean, that's not it's not the angle you would go for in that sort of thing, that history. But it's wild that a bunch of people back in Europe were like, we found Atlantis. Let's go mess it up. And
or this implication that like the indigenous people couldn't have done this on their own, like they have to have European influence, or classical Greek influence to have this civilization.
Absolutely, yeah. So I think that's essentially what I've got. I'll mention too, one of the recent Podicus Magnuses we did a few months ago. We did a volcano myth one. And that's actually where I had, with my connections of Atlantis, never connected it to volcanoes and the Santorini explosion, but it is super tied to that. The Theogony poem, Plato, Santorini eruption. I mean, it happening in that time period. It's that connection has been there for quite some time, to the classical minds, and into today. I mean, it does kind of present a scientific explanation, but I will just kind of toot my own horn though. I nothing ever really mentioned the euhemeristic approach, and this is like textbook euhemerism. You have a civilization there. Maybe it's called Atlantis or Atlanticos or whatever the Greek word or Proto-Indo-European word would have been, and big explosion. It just annihilates these people, but and that word spreads through trade, through the Mediterranean. Word can kind of spread, and the stories kind of go, and that story evolves into, oh yeah, like they freaking had Blackberries and Palm Pilots, and they were running around, and it was great. The biggest explosion ever happens, and they're
high-speed rail. Yeah,
we knew that. I mean, did life get better after the Palm Pilot was made? Can we have like a? No, I'm just kidding. So. Yeah, it's this really cool thing, and but Plato, he's essentially the primary source of it all. People say like he invented Atlantis. That's just not it. He didn't invent anything.
Well,
just one day was like,
let's give Plato some credit.
He just one day was like, I'm gonna write this all down. No one's writing this crap down. And then he said stuff like, you guys relied too much on writing stuff down. I'm gonna write this down. So it's really cool. Yeah, really great stuff here. I will mention too, because I actually had a little etymology section that I scrolled over. The term Atlanteans was also applied to Greeks, applied by the Greeks to the Phoenician colonies along the Barbary coast of North Africa, again, near the Atlas Mountains. So it makes sense. And Diodorus Siculus, who I mentioned in the, I think, 1st century AD, talked about how they have a Titan mythology there, and then them having wars with Libyan Amazones. And so Platon may have the same nation in mind, for he names the second Atlantean king, the real kind of one, in this Phoenician colony near the Straits of Gibraltar. So,
right,
if Plato was making it up himself, an original Plato story concept, then he might have been just like nabbing this name for these people. So, and again, it just kind of further says they're in this area. Maybe there was people there for quite a while that were called Atlanteans, and they did go poof. And this is the Atlantis was a city. It was humoristic in the sense that it evolved into the myth of being advanced and all that stuff. And then Plato stealing it without crediting in his stories, so his dialogues. But a wild subject. I did not. I knew that there was something there, but I guess just like my 90s cartoons had satisfied my ideas of what Atlantis is and was, and Aquaman doing aqua things and his Speedo. But it's very cool how deep it goes, but then the discussion and the evolution of it today and what these dudes in the 1700s were thinking. I mean, can you imagine, like, you discover the new continent and the first thing you think is like Atlantis? I mean, and that's the direction. That's what he said.
We went west.
Right, we did it. So yeah, I just loved it. I really enjoyed looking into this subject. So, well, yeah, that's it. I'm spent. That's all my stuff.
Hey, great research, Brian. Really, I mean, good stuff.
Kudos,
really tied it together.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I know. And you guys had a great story that kind of brought it in. I never really knew like Atlantis was destroyed. It was lost, the lost city of Atlantis. You don't just if I lose my keys, I didn't pulverize them. I don't grind them in my coffee grinder and then look at my girlfriend and go, they're lost. I don't do that. So it was always the lost city of Atlantis, not the Zeus like orbital bombardment city of Atlantis. So it was wild to see that. And Cammy and I, we just talked about Arachne and damn Minerva / Athena like meddling in on like everybody's business, punishing everybody. And that was we talked about 2 people lives she messed with. Zeus literally just decimates this whole place. It's just wild. So again, in conclusion, poor Poseidon, Athenians like to toot their own horns. That's it. That's pretty much it in a nutshell. Well, Peter and Cammy, you guys did a great job as always. Thanks so much for your stories on
Thank you.
This wonderful classic city. Everyone, I hope you enjoyed this story. Please let us know what you think. If I missed something, if we missed something, if we got something wrong, let us know. We'll always go back out there and talk about it. Please check out our events coming up again on Thursday, the 3rd of December, 2020. Cammy and I will be on the Indie Pods at 8:30 EST, and then you can join me and Peter going ho 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 on Sunday, December 6th at 9 p.m. EST. Yeah. So
I can't stay up that late.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's bedtime right now. So, oh, my camera just
I love it. Look at that face.
That's great.
just zoomed in. Please go to youtube.com/Mythstorie to take a look at this weird happenstance. I think that's about it, though, guys. Did I miss anything?
I think you're good.
Awesome. Well, everyone, we will see you next time.
Oh.